What is going on, guys? So we're back with a brand new video, and we're gonna kind of take like a detour from the Discord dashboard series, because I did mention on my YouTube community post that I will be using Nest.js, and I also did mention it in the first video as well. And the reason why I'm using Nest is because I personally have been using it for some time and I really enjoy it. And I've already done a Discord dashboard with Express before, and I feel like I want to introduce new technologies to people. And Nest.js itself is a very popular technology. It's also really freaking good. I've been using it for some time, and I personally really enjoy using Nest.js because it just has so much support for literally anything. Like, they have support for GraphQL, WebSockets, just things that actually just come to you. Like, they have wrappers around a lot of these popular open source software that you can just use, and you don't have to worry about it because everything is so like easy to configure. But first of all, what exactly is Nest.js, right? Well, Nest.js is just a framework, a web framework, and it was built on top of Express. And Nest.js follows an MVC approach. We have a controller service architecture. We also have repositories, where repositories are basically where you would use a repository to access data from a database. Okay, and there's a bunch of stuff that you would do in Nest that is done a lot differently compared to something like Express. Now I would consider Nest.js the spring boot of Node, because again, the patterns are very similar. Nest.js also follows the dependency injection inversion of control pattern, and I just think it's awesome. So, and it's also very easy to get started with Nest too. You can install the CLI and you can bootstrap a quick project, and you can literally just get it started very easily. And it's also, in my opinion, I feel like so much better than Express because there's actual structure. Well, let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing that you should do is you should install the Nest Js the CLI tool. It's very easy. Just type npm i-g. This was installed globally, and the package name is @nestjs/cli. Okay, and then once you have installed that, you just simply type nest new project name, and that'll create a project for you. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. If you don't want to install the CLI tool, you can see the documentation that they do have a starter project for you, but just install the CLI tool. It shouldn't be, that complicated. But I have the tool already, so we're going to go ahead and start up our app. So let's do nest new, and I'm just going to call this Discord Nest.js, or not Discord, dashboard Nest.js backend. So I'm going to select Yarn as my package manager. And there we go. We're done. So now all we do is if I type ls, or let me cd into the dashboard folder, and if I type ls, you can see we have all of our files. I'm going to type code to open up our project, and let's go through the structure of this project real quick. So obviously we have our node modules folder. This is where all of your npm packages are going to be installed. Before I go into the source and test folder, let's talk about these files over here. So we have our ESLint file over here. This is for ESLint. If you don't want to use ESLint, you could probably just delete this, but I personally would recommend against that because ESLint is a very good tool. Okay. We also have our gitignore file over here. So this is pretty, if you've never used Git before, then you don't have to worry about this, but this is just by default going to ignore certain files so that it's not committed. We have our prettier.rc file. So prettier is a formatter, and you can set up a bunch of other options over here. I have prettier installed in Visual Studio Code, so this is kind of useless for me, but I'll just leave it there anyways. We also have our nestcli.json file, so this is for the CLI tool. You can just ignore this. If you want to look into it, they have documentation on it. We have our package.json file. Okay, this is literally just the manifest file. This is where all of your the project details are listed, so the name, version, etc. That's what the manifest file of a project typically is. You don't have to worry so much about it though. We also have our README, and we have the tsconfig.build.json as well as tsconfig.json file. And this is just for TypeScript, so it allows TypeScript to know how to properly build a project, and what to include and what not to include in the compilation. Okay, and then we have our yarn.log file, so we're not gonna worry about it though. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Now let's look into the test folder. So this is just for your end-to-end tests. So if you want to write end-to-end tests, which is basically testing your whole application automatically, you would do that inside this file. Okay, and then we also have our source folder over here. And we also, I forgot to mention, we also have the .json config over here. This is just for configuration for Jest, but again, we're not going to write any, we're most likely not going to write any test cases in this video at least, so you guys can ignore that for now. Okay, so let's look at the main.ts file. So you can see that we have our Nest factory being imported, and we also have app module. So what's going on here is we're basically going to call this bootstrap function, and it's going to create the application. This is very equivalent to doing something like const app equals express when you're building out your Express app. It's very similar. This app over here is an iNest instance, and it has a bunch of different methods that you can use. And you can see that we can actually register middleware here too. So a lot of stuff that you have done in Express is going to be very similar to how you would do in Nest.js. So for example, registering middleware, okay, it's going to be the same exact way. You would do app.use and etc. Depends on the situation, but most of the time that would be the case. Okay, and then we have our app.listen. So this is going to listen to requests on port 3000. Okay, and that's pretty much it. So now if we look at, let's look at app.module.ts. So in Nest.js, we have what's called a module. And you can think of a module like, you can kind of think of like a mini collection of all of your files. So you can think of it like a collection of your controllers, your providers, all the code that you write, and then we can export that module and we can reuse it in our application. So we can import that module into another module that might depend on it, and we can take advantage of all of the functionalities that we've written in that module. So this way we don't have to rewrite code over and over again. We can just reuse it. Okay, so with modules though, you can tell that it's a module if it's decorated with this module decorator. And over here we have some metadata, so it gives you all of the imports. Currently we're not importing anything, but very likely when we install packages like TypeORM, GraphQL, if we want to configure databases, we would want to make sure we import that into the app module. Okay, but if we create our own modules, we would also want to make sure it's imported here as well. We have our controllers. So like I said before, if I haven't mentioned already, Nest.js follows the controller service architecture. So I'll talk about the controller in just a sec, and as well as the service. Okay, but this is where you would have all of your controllers, and the provider over here is for Nest.js to provide things like services, pipes, guards, things like that. These are what allows Nest to take advantage of dependency injection. So it'll look at all these providers, and then it will basically inject them into your application. So we'll get to that when we actually look at the code for controller and service. But that's pretty much it for the app.module.ts file. Now let's look at the controller file. So the controller file, this is where you will create all of your routes. So for example, in Express, you would do something like app.get, and then API/hello, right? That's how you would create your routes. But in Nest.js, you actually create all of your routes in the controller. So controllers are decorated with the controller decorator over here, okay? And we have this export class app controller, okay? And we have our constructor, and we have this function over here. So right now our controller, let me actually start up the application because that will make a lot more sense. So let's start it up. Okay, so this will start up on port 3000. Okay, so if I go to localhost port 3000, you'll see that I have hello world. Okay, so how exactly does this work? Well, right now our controller by default is going to resort to the base path. So we don't have any prefix for our path right now. So default is just the base path /. If I want to change that base path for every single route in this controller, I can do that by passing in a parameter into this controller decorator, and I can call it app. Now, the nice thing about Nest is that it'll auto reload. So I'm going to go over to here. If I refresh, you can see that it'll say cannot get. So let me zoom a little bit. But if I go over to /app, we get hello world. We can also do the same thing too for the functions over here. So over here, we have this get decorator. So this is a decorator that you would use to specify the route, right? You use it to specify the route that you want to handle. So for example, if you want to make a get request, you use the get decorator, and you can also pass in a string and denote the path for this specific controller function over here. So let's say, for example, you might have different paths. So this path might be something like hello. If I save, if I refresh, you can see it says cannot get /app. That's because we don't have an actual route. We don't actually have a handler that's going to handle the base /app route. We do have one for hello though. So let's go ahead and visit that. And there we go. So hopefully this makes sense. It's pretty straightforward. Okay, you basically can change up the name, and whatever you change it to, that is the path that you have to visit in order for it to return whatever you're getting from the service. Okay, let's go ahead and create another one. Let's do a get. Let's do /app, and this path will be name. Let's say get name, and this will return a string, and we'll just hard code the value. Let's return Arizona. So in case I'm going to refresh. So remember, if I try to go to /name, that's not going to work because our controller resorts to the, well, right now this controller, the base path of it is app. Okay, so that's always prefix it with /app. There you go, Arizona. All right, cool. So hopefully the controller part makes sense. If you wanted to do things such as post requests, you would use the post decorator. Okay, you can see that it gets auto import over here. And you could do something like create user, for example. Okay, and then you would make the HTTP post request, and that's pretty much it. Okay, but we'll talk about that in just a sec. But let's talk about the service real quick. Okay, so hopefully you guys understand what the controller is responsible for. Okay, so basically the controller usually is mainly for controlling the request and the response. So it basically dictates, you know, what you should do with the request, what response you should send back, and etc. Now, when it comes to the business logic, in terms of, you know, actually executing certain, you know, things to do, you would want to do that in the service layer. So that's why we have this app service over here. So if we look at the code right over here, so if you can also right click and go to definition, but it's right over here. Okay, so let's look at this real quick. So right over here in the app.service.ts file, we have, first we import injectable, and this is basically a function, it's basically a decorator that you would use to mark classes that can be injected. So typically you'd want to mark your providers, which is things like services, pipes, guards, etc. And you want to mark it as an injectable because what you want to do is you want Nest to be able to inject those dependencies into your application, into the constructor right over here. Okay, so I would suggest you guys look into dependency injection. It's pretty cool, but essentially that's what's going on over here, is we're marking it as injectable. Okay, and now we have this get hello function, and it returns a string. So you can see over here we are calling right over here in this controller. Let me actually just go back over here. We are calling this .appService.getHello, and that's going to call this function over here. And this function is going to execute its business logic. Right now it's currently just returning a string. Okay, but typically you would want to interact with some database. And once it gets the response, once it gets the value back, we just return it in the controller. Okay, so if I want, I can create another function. Let's return a string, and let's return Arizona. And we're going to go ahead, and instead of returning this hard-coded value over here in the controller, we're going to return the return value of this .appService.getName. And now if I save and if I refresh, the same thing happens. If I change this to, let's say, I don't know, Phoenix. gives us Phoenix. Pretty cool. Okay, so obviously, if you really wanted to, you could implement you can implement what you're implementing in the app service file inside the app.controller, but that would basically be going against the pattern of this whole MVC architecture. Okay, typically you want to abstract a lot. You want to typically abstract these things into the service layer, and you want to try your best to follow single responsibility rule. So that way the controller is always going to be responsible for literally just calling a function and returning the response, and that's it. The service is going to be responsible for handling all of the business logic. When it comes to retrieving data, you would typically let the repository layer take care of that. Now when it comes to the repository layer, we would use like something like an ORM, like Mongoose or TypeORM, but we'll get to that. We'll get to that in later on in this video. Okay, so that's pretty much it when it comes to Nest.js. Okay, so we can obviously play around with Nest. So what I can also do is I can also create a post request, and let's just do something like I don't know, user. So this would just be creating a user. And what we can do is we can actually pass in parameters into this function over here. So one thing that you might be used to in Express is every single handler function will always receive the request and response object. So you'd have something like recres. So you can actually pass it into this function. The way you do that is you would first use the @rec decorator. Okay, and you can read a little bit about it. But it's basically just a decorator that you can use to specify that this is the request object. So I just name this rec, and I'm going to type annotate this to request. So that's going to come from Express types over there. Okay, and I'm also going to do the same for the response. So that's going to import the response decorator from NestJS common. Like I said, NestJS is literally just built on top of Express. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and import the response object, or not the response object type, from Express. You want to be very careful because the response type, there's like 3 different ones over here, but the one we're importing it from is Express. You can also just directly import it from the Express package over here too. Okay, great. So now I can just, let me actually console log rec.body, and what I'm going to do is I'll open up Postman. Let me actually see if I can actually do this from the terminal. So I have to open up Postman, but I'm just going to try to make a simple request real quick. So let's see, method post. Let's do URI HTTP localhost 3000, I think, and that'll be app, and then user. Okay, there we go. We have it. You can see it's an empty object. It's not going to give us a response back. Maybe I could do something like body. Oh, I forgot to put in quotes. All right, so let's try that again. So invoke this method. Let's see, method. Method post URI HTTP localhost port 3000 /app/user, and then for the body, for the request body, we'll just do hyphen body, and then we will pass it in by doing $rec body, and there you go. So you can see that we have the request being sent over there. We know for a fact it's working, and we can send back a response if we want to. So I can just send back something like message created user. All right, let's try this again. And there you go, we have a message. All right, and obviously we could abstract all of our logic into the app service. So we could do something like create user and then this would return, you know, an instance of a user, but for now I'll just return a string, return new user, and then you could do something like const user equals this dot app service dot create user, and then you can just send it back. So you can play around with it, but ideally that's what you're doing. Okay, so hopefully that's pretty straightforward, and that's how you can use decorators. But if you don't want to use decorators, and if you just want to return it just like this, you can. Okay, if you don't really need the request and the response object, then you don't necessarily need to provide that. But it is nice to have it if you need to return custom status codes. But typically, let's say for example, if you have a route that is always going to return a 200 response no matter what, you can actually use the HTTP status decorator. I think not decorator, not status. Sorry, it's HTTP code, and then you can pass in the number, and then it'll always return a 200 no matter what. Okay, so let me actually open up Postman real quick, just so I think Postman would be a lot easier. So let's say for example, if I go over here, and let's go over to localhost port 3000, and then we're going to visit name. So we get Phoenix, but if I want, I can always return a 400. So you can see it says bad request, but it's going to give us the data back. Okay. If I can also do something like a 201, and I'll send back a 201. So this is very useful if you always know that this route is always going to return the same exact code. So don't use this if you don't think that if you think that your route is going to send back different responses, because a lot of times certain routes might send back a 200 or a 400. Okay, so I would recommend, you know, looking into that. So another nice thing that we can do in Nest is, let's say for example, if we want our request body to be to have specific properties, right? Because right now we don't know exactly what's going to be in the request body, so we don't really have IntelliSense. What we can do is we can create what's called a data transfer object, and data transfer objects are pretty cool because you can actually let me go over here and let me just show you guys a documentation on Dtos. But yeah, you can basically use it to determine how, or define how, the data is sent over like the network. Okay, so we can create a DTO like this, and we can expect this DTO to always have, well, not always, but it will have name, age, breed for this DTO. Okay, so let's say for example, if I want to have a user DTO, so what I'm going to do is I would create a DTO. For now, I'm just going to create it up here. I do not recommend doing that because I don't have any other files, but I'm just going to create up here for now. But don't do this in an actual application. I'm just doing it just to, you know, cheat a little bit. I'm going to call this user DTO, and we'll expect a username, string, password, string, email, string. Okay, and then what I can do is I can use the @body decorator. So instead of having the request, because right now we're using the request object to get the request body, we can actually use the body decorator. Okay, that's going to get imported up top over here. Okay, and then I can do user DTO, just like that. Okay, that's pretty simple. So now if I want, I can just get rid of all this. Let's get rid of this. Let me just console log user. And let's go ahead and let's just do a 201 for now. Let's just console log it. Okay, so now let's go into our app. Let me just close this out because we're using Postman now. So let's go over to post and let's just post the user. So right now it's going to give us a 201, but you can see the problem here is that it's actually not even giving us it's not actually doing anything, any validation at all. So this is where you would probably want to use something like, I think, a filter in NestJS. I know they have a bunch of different things, but I would suggest you guys look in documentation. But you look through a filter, or you can, I think it's a filter is probably what you want to use. Yeah, I think the filter is what you'd want to use. So you want to use the filter, and you would probably want to use the filter to check to make sure that the request body is correct. because if it's not, then obviously it's going to break your code, right? Because obviously right now it's giving us a 201 response, even though we didn't actually create anything, so that's bad. Okay, but if I wanted to send some stuff over here, let's send a payload. So let me see, I'm going to send URL encoded. I think it should by default parse that for us. So let's send. Okay, so now we have username Anson. Let's type in a password. Let's just type Anson. You can see that that's also there too. I'm going to type in a bunch of other fields too. Let's type email Anson. I think we also had that as well. Let's type one more. Let's do age 23. So you can see over here, if I look over here, we also still have the age property as well. So like I said, it doesn't do any validation. You still need to do that. But it's a good way to actually have IntelliSense so that you can actually structure how your request body should, what it should have. So you don't have to worry about, even if the user did pass in random stuff, you would let the filter take care of that. Okay, so that's pretty cool. So let's do one more. Let's do one more inside this controller, and I'm going to show you guys how to create a custom one. So let's say, for example, we need route parameters. So route parameters are very important, right? Route parameters allow us to basically pass in custom data in the route, and based on that data, we can return a specific response. Okay, so let's say, for example, I want to create a route. Let's say, actually, I'll do that, but let me actually create a new controller. Might as well. Okay, might as well. So I'm just gonna I'll probably just leave all this alone. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a controller. So let's do that real quick. So let's do Nest G controller. Actually, let's create a module first. Let's do Nest G module, and we'll call this the users module. Right, this will be a module that is responsible for handling users. So you can see by default it'll create the users module over here. Okay, and we can see in the app.module it'll auto import that right over here, which is perfect. You can even see over here, Nest Js the Cli tool will tell you what it does. It creates this file and then it updates this file. Pretty simple. Now inside the users module, I'm going to go ahead and generate a controller. So we're going to generate a controller inside /users. So that's going to visit this users path. And we're going to call this, let's see, let's do users. Okay, so you can see over here, it created two files, the users.control.spec and then the users.control.ts, and then it updated the users module. Okay, one thing I also forgot to mention was the .spec.ts file. This is the test file, but you most likely don't need to worry about that. Okay, in case I didn't mention it, but just don't worry about the test file for now. Okay, so actually I'm going to go ahead and rename this to controllers. Actually, let me actually redo this again because I really want this to follow a certain way. Let me redo this again. So we have the users module, and what I want to do Nest G controller /users /controllers, and I think that should be fine. Okay, so that should create a new folder. Yep, perfect. So create a new folder called controllers. Inside that folder, it created the users folder, because obviously we're going to have different controllers. Okay, so I'll create another controller. Let's do users controller. We also do something like, I don't know, users posts. Users can have posts. Okay, now we have two controllers. Okay, and you can see we have those controllers being imported right over here, or not imported, but they are placed over here. Okay, and remember this is the users module. So this users module will be exported and imported inside app.module.ts, and we don't actually have to pass in user controller because we already have the users module imported. So Nest will know that it's right there and it's going to map it. So that's pretty cool. And now let's go ahead and create some services. So let's do Nest Js Service /users. So this will specify the path in case you didn't realize. So /users, so we're going to go inside this users module path, services, and we'll do users service. I'll call it user service. Okay, so we have services, user service. Okay, let's create another service, post. There we go. We have two services. So we have two controllers and two services that go with the controllers. Okay, and each file obviously has its own test file, but like I said, don't worry about that. Okay, and now let's look at the users.module.ts. You can see we have the providers, okay, and we have the user service and we have the post service. So every single time you create a service, you need to make sure you add that in as a provider. Okay, and like I said, because we have everything in this module, everything will just be imported into the app.module.ts because we are importing users module. So I don't have to specify something like user service right over here. I don't have to do that. Okay. All right. So now that we have our module, you can actually follow this structure. Now, obviously, everyone has their own ways of structuring their apps. It really depends on you. Personally, I like structuring my app like this, where I have my source folder, and then everything inside the source folder is where I'm going to have all my modules. Okay, so if you want to create more modules, you can do that, but we're going to leave all this alone for now. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just delete everything that we've just done. So I'm going to delete the I'm going to delete the app.control.spec. I'm going to delete the app.controller.ts. And we're going to delete the app.service.ts, and you also want to make sure you delete them from the app.module.ts file, and same thing over here. So currently our app module literally doesn't have anything but just the imports. Okay, so I'm also going to do one thing. In the bootstrap function, I'm going to reference our app, and I'm going to set global prefix to API. So what this will do is it'll set the base path to API. So every single request will be prefixed. Well, not will be prefixed, but in order to visit those routes, we need to prefix with /API. Okay. So right now we should have our controllers over here. So let's work with the user's controller. And you can see right over here, when we generate the controller, it provides this user's parameter inside, or the argument inside this controller's function, or the decorator function. Okay, so if we want to visit this controller, we would have to do /API/users. Let's go ahead and set up the constructor. For now, we're not really going to use it yet, but we will need to use it later. And let's set up some routes. So let's do get. So this will just be simple get, and we'll do something like get users. Okay, and for now I will just return user. Okay, we'll do a simple post create user, and let's see, that should be it for now. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to also inject the service. Now what we're going to do with the service though is typically you could do something like this: private read-only user service, and then user service. So this will inject the service into your controller. Okay, but a typical pattern that you should follow is you should create an interface, and you can call it whatever you want, but I'm going to create the interface inside user over here inside the services user file. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to export interface. I'm going to call this user service. Not the best name, but typically what you want to do is you want to create an interface for all of your services. Now there's this thing called programming to the interface versus programming to implementation. If you were to create all of your functions inside this user service, and if you were to call them, well, you would be calling a concrete implementation. We don't want to do that because with our application, we might need to change some code at some point. And if we program to implementation, it will force us to have to change a lot of different stuff. But if we program to the interface, all we need to do is just swap out the interfaces, and that's it. Because we already have the implementation done already. We just swap everything out, and we are good to go. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and just simply create our functions into the user service. So let's do create user. Let's get user, and that's gonna be for now. And what we're gonna do is we're going to implement user service, and now it's going to force us to implement these two methods because we are basically creating a contract relationship between services, between our interface, right? Whenever you implement an interface, you need to implement all of its abstract methods, and that's what these methods are. They're abstract. They need to be implemented. You need to create a concrete implementation. So I'm just going to go ahead and just click on quick fix, implement these methods. Okay. And I'm just going to delete this. We'll just do return new user and return the array. Okay, so that's pretty cool. And what you want to do next is you want to go over to, let's see, users module. Okay, now instead of actually providing it like this, what you want to do is you want to provide it using a token. So I'm going to do something like user service, use class user service, just like that. Okay, now we're going to get an error, I think, because I think we need to also make sure we export this as well. Yep, that's fine. So what we'll do is we will do exports, and we'll do the same thing right over here. Let's see what's going on. Oh wait, sorry about that. That wasn't the issue. We need to actually do this. We're going to go inside user's controller. So instead of injecting it like this, we're going to inject it like this. We're going to use the inject function over here. We're going to pass in the token. Okay, so the token is user service because that's what we called it. We're going to do that, and we're going to do private read only user service. Now before we type annotated to be the user service, the actual implementation, we're not going to do that, because if we do that, we might accidentally create some functions over here that we're going to call directly, which is the implementation. We want to call the interfaces functions. Okay, so we're going to do user service. So this will force us to only be able to call the actual functions from user service. Okay. So now you can see that our error should have gotten fixed. Yep, perfect. Okay, so now watch this, and you'll understand why this is so important. So let's say, for example, if I want to create my own method right over here. Okay, so I just created a concrete implementation of delete user because this is not defined in the interface. So let's say, for example, if I were to go over here and I want to do a delete request, I'll do something like this dot user service. Now watch this. If I hit dot, you're going to see that we only get two methods. We don't get the delete user. The reason why is because we are programming to the interface, and we've also type annotated this to iUser service as well, and that's what you want to do. Okay, because we are trying to program to the interface, which means that we're only going to be able to call methods that are from the interface that we know are going to be implemented. Now, if at some point we need to change up the implementation, all we need to do is just create the new implementation, make sure we implement the iUser service, and then we just swap it out, and that's it. You don't need to change any of your code inside the controller. That's why we want to follow this pattern. Now let's say obviously if you really wanted to, you could do user service, and then this would let you call the delete user. But again, this would be breaking the rule of programming to interface, and you would actually be programming to implementation because you're calling a concrete function over here. You don't want to do that, okay? Because let's say, for example, if you changed some stuff with this implementation, well, it might actually break some of your other code too. Okay, so that's just one thing that I just wanted to mention because I feel like this is a pattern that not everyone knows about. So I'd like to introduce it to you guys because this channel is all about teaching you things. But now watch this. If I go ahead and if I create the delete user method here, it will work just fine. Okay, that's because we've created the abstract method. We are implementing over here, and that's it. And now we can actually call it. Okay, so yeah, let's go ahead and let's go back to our service. So let's do this. Get users. All right, so we're gonna visit this route over here, and we're gonna go to /post. So we're gonna go visit /API/user. Oh, should be a get. Or it was users. There we go. So it was users. Let's see what's going on over here. It says maximum call stack exceeded. Oh, it's user service dot get user. There we go. Okay, there we go. We have an empty array. Perfect. Okay, now we can do the same thing with post. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to create my DTO inside here. So like I said before, I told you not to create the DTO. Well, you could do it like inside the file temporarily, but I just did it just to cheat a little bit. But typically you want to group your DTO inside its own folder. So I'm going to go ahead and just do, let's see, user.dto.ts. Export interface. Actually, I'm just going to name this user.ts. You can actually just reuse this over and over again if you really want to, but I'll leave this alone for now. Okay, so let's go over here. We're going to use the body param decorator, and then we're going to go ahead and do user DTO. And what we're going to do is we're going to go into the service, and inside create user, we're going to take in a user. Okay, so DTOs typically should be a lot different than I think the model itself. Like I said, you can reuse these things if you really want to, because obviously you don't need to even call a DTO. So for example, if you want to create just a regular interface called user, and then you want to use that to type annotate your parameters, you can do that as well. So what I'm going to do is over here, I'm going to do user DTO. Typically this would be a user model, something like from TypeORM or Mongoose. But because I'm not going to create two of them, I'll just reuse the same one. Okay. And what I'll do is I'll just do private users, and just make this an array of user DTOs. And every single time I call this create user function, I'll just do this .users.push user. And we need to actually go into our interface, because right now it's complaining that we are providing a parameter even though the abstract method does not expect one. Okay, there we go. Okay, there we go, perfect. All right, so I'm just gonna go ahead and return this, and yeah, so now all we do in create user is we just simply do this user service create user. We just pass in the user, and like I said, you would want to make sure you validate everything using something like a filter. Okay, and that's gonna be pretty much it for that. I'll just return this as well, and then we will annotate this to always return a tool1. Okay, so it actually also comes with HTTP status, which is just an enum of a bunch of codes, so you don't have to manually type in like tool1. It can be annoying to keep track of every single one of them, but let's go and try this out. Let me actually do one more thing. Let's go back to get users, and I'm going to return this .users, and we're going to go ahead and just type annotate this to return an array of user DTO. Like I said, you don't have to call it DTO, because like I said, DTO stands for data transfer object, but like I said, you can call it whatever you want. Okay, so let's go ahead and try this out. So if we get this, we're going to get an empty array. Now let's go post. So this is going to post to /users. Okay, so it creates 1, 2, 3. let's get the users now. We have our users over here. Like I said, because we didn't validate anything, it actually just added the age to the array. Okay, even though this is actually wrong, because because the interface should only have 3 values. This is why you still need to make sure you validate your data. Okay, and yeah, that's pretty much it. So if you want to implement delete user, you would just do that as well, right? You would just pass in the user to delete, and then delete from the database or whatever, wherever it is that you're storing your data. Okay, so let's go back to what I wanted to do originally, and that was route parameters. I know I kind of got carried away a little bit, but let's do a route parameter, and let's do a get, and we'll do users/id. So we're gonna get the user by ID. Okay, and what we're gonna do is inside the let's do get user by ID, and we're gonna go ahead and use the param decorator. And this param decorator is you're gonna pass in the param, the parameter. Okay, so for example, we named our parameter ID. Okay, that's denoted with this colon, so colon ID. You can name it whatever you want. You can do colon user ID if you want to. Okay, but whatever you name it, you have to make sure you pass it into here as ID. And then you can name the actual function parameter whatever you want as well. Okay, so we're going to make sure that this is a type of string. You can also make it so that, let's say for example, if you expect this to be a number, you can actually use a pipe to parse it to a number, but we'll leave it as a string for now. Okay, now let me actually double check, because we don't actually have an ID. We have a username, so you know what, I'll do username instead. Get user, okay, by username. So right now we're in the controller, and with the controller you don't really need to like use an interface for it. You can just create the implementation here. Doesn't really matter too much. Alright, so now we need to go into our user service, and we need to make sure we have the actual function to retrieve a user by username. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and create another abstract method called get user by username, and it's going to take in one parameter. Okay, and you can also type annotate it to return whatever it is that you want. So this, we expect this to return a user DTO. We're going to go inside the user service, and you can see it's going to give us a red line because it's saying that it incorrectly implements the interface because we don't have get user by username. Let's implement that. And what we're going to do is we're just going to write some basic logic. So I'm just going to do const, or not const, return this.users.find user, where user dots username equals, not email. Okay, there we go. And yeah, so this will return I think either a user DTO or undefined. So I'm actually go ahead and fix that, because this could be undefined. Yep, because we can probably get something that isn't actually in the array. Alright, so now we just simply do return this.userService, get user by username, pass in that username, and that's it. That's literally it. So now right now, if I try to retrieve a user, or try to retrieve a user, is not going to work. If I try to retrieve a user by, let's say, Anson, it's just going to return a 200, okay? But it's going to give us nothing. Okay, we can actually make it so that, let's do this, const user. We can make it so that, turn user, we can use a turn operator. So if the user is actually truthy, we'll return the user. But if it's not truthy, we'll just return a JSON object. Just so that at least they can actually serialize this, or just check to see if it's truthy or not. I think it's easier to do that. And I'll also just annotate this with a HTTP status code of OK, which just means 200. Okay. Yeah, so that should be fine. So let's go ahead and create some users. So let's create a user, and we'll first create a user called Anson. Then we'll create a user called, let's do Dan. And we'll do Kelvin. And we'll do Mike. So that's 4 users. Now let's go ahead and get all of our users. Okay. We have all of our users right over here. Now let's go ahead and get a user by username. There we go. We have Anson, Kelvin, Dan, Mike. Perfect. Okay, and again, if you wanted to implement delete, you can do it yourself. I'll leave that for you guys to do as an exercise. It's actually really easy. You would just pretty much go through the array. I mean, what you could do is you could probably just concat it, or you can splice it. It's really up to you. But or you could find the index and then you can splice it. But I'll leave that for you guys as an exercise. All right, so that's pretty much it with route parameters. Okay, that's pretty useful. Okay. So I think that should pretty much cover majority of the basics of NestJS. Like I said, if I missed anything, you can always resort to the documentation and look up what it is that you need to figure out, right? Just ask yourself questions and just look at the documentation and see what it is that you can actually, understand from the docs. Okay, and like I said, there's a lot of stuff that you can read up on. I would highly recommend you read the documentation because they do have a lot of different information. Okay, but that's going to be it for this NestJS tutorial, just for this one. We will be having more tutorials because I do want to cover a lot of the basic stuff. Okay, so right now all we've done so far was we've just covered the basics of creating a simple, API with Nest. So in the next couple videos, we're going to be implementing other things with Nest.js. So what I want to do is I want to show you guys how you can set up things like, authentication, passport. It's a lot different to do it in Nest.js, so I figured I would make a video to show you guys how to do that. But yeah, that's going to be pretty much it. So hopefully you guys like this video, and I'll see you guys in my next one. Peace out.